All right, so thank you for tuning in and chomping at the bit. Hopefully you're enjoying your day, your night, whenever you're checking this episode out. But I just want to say thanks for tuning in. Hope everything's going well with you. This episode, I want to take a look at college football as it's been in the news this past week. If you didn't know, we have some more conference realignment going on. So I want to talk about that, as well as what I see as the next steps for college football. And I think the question needs to be asked, could this have all been avoided years ago with some simple moves? So I'll talk about all that. And yeah, because it's another, looks like another round of realignment in college football. I mean, I think we're at the point where it's somewhat out of hand, but the writing's kind of been on the wall, so none of this is surprising, but it's definitely going to change the way that you watch college football in a couple of years. So we'll go ahead, dive into that, and I don't know, we'll see if by the end of the episode whether or not this is like some type of, if it's a bad thing or not. That's what we'll figure it out by the end of the episode. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into the topic right now. So once again, if you hadn't heard, we found out that USC and UCLA are going to leave the Pac12 and join the Big Ten around 2024, because I believe that's the earliest that they can join. So we'll have to see if, that happens or not. I'm assuming it probably will. For all we know, maybe they find a way to get in 2023. I doubt it, but we'll see. So this is following, if you remember, a little time ago, I think almost a year ago, Texas and Oklahoma decided to leave the Big 12 for the SEC. So that was a big deal because those are the two biggest schools in the Big 12. And now we have USC, UCLA, which are the two biggest schools in the Pac-12 now leaving. So now the question needs to be asked, where does that leave the Pac-12, at least what's left of it? Will the Big Ten continue to add schools? Will the Big 12, well, not the Big 12, will the SEC, I guess, try to answer the Big Ten's move, which is an answer to, I guess, the SEC's move? So is it now just going to become something where the SEC and the Big Ten go back and forth, poaching schools from Pac-12 and Big 12 until those conferences are gone? Where does the ACC fit in all of this? Because with all of this realignment, SEC and Big Ten are getting bigger while the ACC is kind of being stagnant right now. And part of that's because there is that big name school that's out there that all of these conferences are trying to get to. And if that shoe were to drop, then this whole realignment thing will go to astronomical heights. Of course, I'm talking about Notre Dame. So now that it looks like the Big 12, there's not really a lot of interest there, I guess, TV wise, with Oklahoma, Texas gone. Pac-12 was already, I guess, low on the viewership totem pole for a lot of people because you'd have to stay up really late to watch West Coast college football. And Pac-12 football is nothing compared to Big Ten, SEC. So a lot of the East Coast people weren't really tuning into it because the quality of football wasn't up to, like I said, Big Ten and SEC level. So now, I mean, with that happening, does either decision push Notre Dame any closer to wanting to join a conference at this point? I don't think so. I still believe that they love their independent life, although they kind of still have one toe in the pool with the ACC, because we know they have the agreement where, you know, they play ACC teams on their schedule, and if they qualify, they get to play in the ACC championship game, which is, you know, gives them a leg up trying to get into the college football playoff. So I don't see that changing anytime soon, but I could see maybe in a couple of years or so, depending on what the SEC, Big Ten continue to do, that it gets to a point where maybe Notre Dame looks at the Big Ten and says that conference can do more for them than staying independent with a handshake agreement with the ACC. I mean, I don't see Notre Dame in the SEC. That seems kind of weird to me. I feel like if they're not going to be in the ACC, Big Ten seems like the natural place for them to go. But for right now, I don't think anything that's been done so far pushes them any closer to joining a conference full time in football. Because we know their other sports are in the ACC full time, but you know, football is what drives a lot of this, and which is part of the issue, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But now there's another school out there you got to look at besides Notre Dame that if they were able to be poached by SEC or Big Ten, could set off a really big ripple effect, and that's Clemson. Because think about it. This goes back to what I've kind of been teasing. How did we get here? So, if you remember, you had the BCS system where a computer came up with two teams and they played the national championship game. Everybody knew that couldn't last forever. So when they talked about forming a playoff, I assumed that they were going to go to like 16. And then that way, you know, you have Power 5 conferences, the 5 conference winners get in automatically. Then you have, you know, a number of spots open for those conferences to push in other teams. And then that still gives you some leeway to put in a small school or two and have them battle out for a national title. But they only went to 4 teams, which made me scratch my head because you have Power 5 conferences, but you only have 4 spots. And as we've seen, the committee does all it can to get 2 SEC schools in. So now you have 3 Power 5 conferences fighting for 2 spots. And basically, if Ohio State, Michigan kind of have a normal season for themselves where they go undefeated or lose a game, they're guaranteed to get in. And then Clemson is guaranteed in if they go undefeated or so. So you have like, I don't know, what was it, like 200 something Division I football teams, and only 4 get to play in meaningful postseason games. Doesn't make any sense. That we see with basketball. Basketball's figured it out. They have, you know, whatever. I think they have like 300 or something Division I basketball teams. You put 68 into a tournament and you let it run. The tournament makes a bunch of money, but we know that college football brings in way more than college basketball. So a lot of these realignment stories and all that, it's all football driven. Don't kid yourself. You know, the Big Ten doesn't need USC and UCLA to bolster their college basketball conference, but getting the LA market for their football, you know, conference is a big deal. Same, Texas, Oklahoma going to SEC. Do they really add to them basketball wise? No, but it's a big get for the football side of things. So, 4-team college football playoff has driven all this because, like I said, 2 of the 4 basically come out of the SEC. 1 most likely is going to come from the Big Ten, and 1 from the ACC, Clemson. So the Pac-12 constantly gets left out of it because Pac-12 football is not seen on the same level as the SEC, Big Ten, and ACC. The Big 12 seems like they can only get in if, a Georgia has somewhat of an off season, and then an Oklahoma can slip in. That's, in the grand scheme of things, yes, it's better than the 2-team system, but it still didn't fix the problem. So like I said, at least if you went 12, 16, you can get in Alabama, Georgia's, Clemson's, Notre Dame, Ohio State's, Michigan, USC, Texas, those schools. You'd get a lot of big name schools. You can, allocate a couple of spots for smaller schools, Cincinnati, those schools that do well, but on most years don't get a sniff of the playoff. That would have fixed all of this if they had done that a while ago, but they didn't let it get to this point. So now, can you blame USC and UCLA for moving to the Big Ten? 1, that gets them into a conference that has seemingly a direct line to the college football playoff. That's 1. 2, schedule-wise, which I'll talk about a little bit as well, because there's issues with that's led to this as well. But now their schedule gets a little bit stronger with Big Ten opponents as opposed to big Pac-12 opponents. Both of these are the same with Oklahoma and Texas. That's why they go into the SEC. Now, looking at the 4 schools leaving, I think Oklahoma and Texas probably have a better chance of performing in the SEC than USC, UCLA. USC, I could see being competitive in the Big Ten in a couple of years. It'll take them a while to, I guess in terms of recruit a Big Ten quality team over Pac-12. UCLA, I don't know. I mean, I kind of feel like the Big Ten would have been fine just taking USC, but it seemed like if you're going to take USC, UCLA's kind of packaged with them, so that's why they get to move on. And yeah, so because of that, now schools want to be associated with the Big Ten and the SEC because it feels like it gives them a better chance to get to the playoff than they had before. And it's the same thing we've seen with recruiting where, Alabama has 5-star starting players who are backed up with like 4.5-star players, while most other schools, may have a couple of 5-star players, then a couple more 4-star, a lot of 3-star. So the talent gap is vast in college football as well, which is why you see the same few teams up at the top. And I think that's been a issue for college football, even though, the purists argue about how, adding more teams to the playoff cheapens the regular season because it takes away from conference championships and all that, which is I thought it was kind of a flawed argument to begin with, but it was what it was. And now you look at it, it's a free-for-all at this point. I'm starting to believe that in a few years it's going to be basically Big Ten, SEC, and then a bunch of others kind of floating around trying to find their place in the college football world. Because like I said at the top, a couple of years, let's say Notre Dame joins the Big Ten. At that point, the ACC, you might as well just throw that away. And if it gets to that, that means Clemson's going to obviously leave. So I can see Clemson jump into the SEC. Well, then if that happens, then other, I guess, valuable properties in the ACC will then jump, probably with Clemson at that point, and you're looking at, I guess, Florida State and Miami would probably be the most coveted ACC teams, and then the rest of them kind of float off into college football purgatory, hoping to either join up with some other left behind schools and forming, I guess, their own conference, or I honestly don't know how far this could go, but expect to see bigger name teams fall into these two conferences, because with USC, UCLA gone in the Pac-12, you've got Oregon, which I think is a big enough name that warrants, some type of love from one of these conferences, either the Big Ten or SEC. Maybe Washington, Arizona, possibly. But the rest of the schools, I don't know. Now, one possible solution could be the rumor that Pac-12 and ACC are working on some type of agreement with each other where, I guess what the ACC is at this point and what it could be going forward. They would meet up. So basically your remaining ACC champion would meet up with the remaining of the Pac-12. I believe they already mentioned in Vegas or something, and play almost a champion versus champion type thing, which I guess would be to, bolster those teams' resumes with one more game and try to get them into the playoff. I mean, I still say as long as it stays at 4, not a lot's going to change. And the way that this is going, it'll probably just end up being 2 teams from the brand new SEC, whatever that looks like when the realignment's done, and then 2 teams from the newly formed Big Ten whenever they finish their realignment. So if you didn't think it was a haves versus have-nots before, I mean, it's really that now. And like I said, college football could have fixed this with a larger playoff. And who knows, we would probably still have BC and teams like that still in the Big East, because there would be a spot left open for that champion to get in. And side note, being from Boston, watching Boston college football, I understood why they made the move to the ACC, but I also knew that BC was never going to be, well, I can't say never, but wasn't going to be a consistent power in an ACC football conference. All things considered, if they had stuck with the Big East, and if college football had done right by all conferences opening up a playoff, to everyone, I think Virginia Tech, heck, even Miami would have been fine sticking around in that Big East, which had West Virginia. It was really good football to watch. It was just that they never got any postseason love, so the schools started moving away. Now, but expansion of a college football playoff was not the only issue that led to this point. The other problem is, with no governing body in college football, the schools are like independent contractors who create their own schedule, and that's been a very big problem, for years now. The non-conference schedule, because not all teams play similar non-conference schedules. So, watching a lot of SEC football, not Notre Dame, Alabama and Georgia will be really good, but they also get like 4 or 5 carefully placed games on their schedule that are non-conference where they play inferior competition, but they don't get penalized for it because they blow those teams out, and it just moves them higher up the AP poll. So if Alabama has Georgia in week 11, but they can schedule like Rice in week 9 and Citadel week 10 to gear up for that Georgia game, that's not fair when you look at other schools who, let's take, I think I use this example a lot, but remember those years when Boise State was really good, but they struggled to find bigger name schools to fit on their schedule. So they, sit there and would have to make the most of their opportunity with like their one non-conference game that the committee would pay attention to, where they would play like in Oklahoma or something. And then that one game would basically make their season for them. So it shifted the competitive balance all out of whack because of that, where your top tier schools were afforded the ability to schedule much lesser talent just to pad their win total, while smaller schools had to basically schedule non-conference games that they most likely wouldn't win, hoping for the off year that they could upset a couple of them and get on the committee's radar. And that has led to this as well. So, I think those are the two biggest ones, and we'll have to see where this Pac12 ACC agreement, what exactly that looks like, if it actually happens. If it does, I feel like that's just putting a Band-Aid on, cracking, the dam blocking, the water from entering the town or something. It'll be fine for a couple of years, but I just think inevitably we're going to end up with Big Ten, SEC as your two major super conferences, and then you'll have a bunch of teams that kind of exist. And I think that's the most interesting part with all this, because not all these teams will be appealing to the Big Ten and the SEC. Once again, look at Boston College. What hurts Boston College is they play in a city and in an area where it's pro sport focused. So Boston College is sitting behind the Red Sox, the Celtics, the Bruins, the Patriots, and you can basically say the Revolution in all those sports, and then trickle all the way down to BC, so they don't have the greatest atmosphere. What could help them is the fact that they play in the Boston market, which is a big market nationally. So what necessarily would stop, the Big Ten from reaching out to them to join them, not for the, not for the reason of bringing in a football power, but to extend the Big Ten's reach into the Boston market. That's the only thing they have going for them. But some other schools don't have that affordability. Because technically, let's say, What school should I use? I mean, I guess, Florida State's a big enough name, they should be fine. But let's just take them for instance. The SEC doesn't necessarily need Florida State to get them into the Florida market because the SEC already has the University of Florida. Big Ten, on the other hand, doesn't have a footprint in Florida, so I guess they could call Florida State. But then again, that'd be really weird. I mean, it's already weird enough with USC, UCLA in, because imagine randomly in the middle of the season, Purdue has to fly out to USC to play a game. And if they play it at noon Eastern, that's 9 a.m. out there. So who is that fair to? And I don't know. This whole thing's going to get weird. This is definitely not the end of it. It might drag on a little bit here because Notre Dame doesn't need to make a decision right now. But if they were ever to make a decision, then that will just set off the next wave of dominoes in filling out these super conferences. So it's definitely an interesting story to keep an eye on because it's just another thing that college football, well, the NCAA has kind of butchered in all of this. And I guess the last thing I want to talk about is another thing. I just thought of like a third thing that kind of is driving this, or at least maybe not was a priority in, these schools leaving, but I think has kind of been a secondary issue. When you look at a college football Saturday schedule, you could have like 90 games on there, and a lot of the games are easily skippable. And there'd be like one or two that you really wanted to make time to sit down and watch the full game of. I kind of think that's a problem for college football for as many schools and teams that are out there. For your schedule to come down to one or two games that really mean something, that's a major problem. So the more of this realignment that there is, the better the weekend slates look now. So now, when you watch Big Ten football, a lot of times you basically wait for the Ohio State Michigan game, or Michigan State when they play, Ohio State Wisconsin, stuff like that. Now you get Ohio State USC. That's a big deal now. And I know a lot of college football people, there's like a lot of them that don't watch NFL football, but one thing that you can say about the NFL is, when you look at their weekly schedule, you're hard pressed to find a game you really don't care about. You might find one or two, but every other game you want to see for whatever reason. If college football could ever get to that point, then college football, I think at that point you could say college football would be the perfect sport. But they're far from that. I don't know if they'll ever actually get there, but that's definitely a major reason, I guess, to be in favor of all this realignment. But somebody, like I said, who grew up watching Big East football, I think I watched Big Ten football. Because like I said, okay, so I live in the Atlanta area now, but grew up in the Boston area, so that's what I'm talking about here. I don't think I watched a lot of SEC football in Boston, but Big Ten football, Big East football, like I said, is definitely something I miss. Watching BC, West Virginia, or BC Syracuse when both teams were good. Yes, they're both in the ACC together and they both play each other, but it just doesn't feel the same. Now, hopefully, the Jeff Hafley guy is in like his second or third year. Hopefully he can get BC up to the point where they become desirable to one of these super conferences and they get to join. But yeah, I think I covered all I wanted to on that subject. So I guess we can go ahead and close this episode out. And so conference realignment's not going away anytime soon. And it's going to be interesting to see where, once we finish with all this, how everything shakes out. But yeah, so if you enjoyed the episode, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, share. If you leave a comment, review, greatly appreciate it. Let me know what you liked about the episode, what you didn't like. Because like I said, I am open to criticism, anything that can help the show and help make it a better listening experience for you. As I mentioned on the past few episodes, I am looking for top 5 topics, sports-wise, of course, so I can start working that way into the weekly schedule. And what else? Oh, of course, if you're on Twitter, follow me at Chompin' Podcast, and there we can interact. You can give me some ideas for top 5 lists and all that. And yeah, so with that, let me know what you think about conference realignment. Do you think it's gone too far? Would you like to see 2 super conferences just battling it out to fill up the playoff spots? Or do you miss the days where you had, a number of conferences with teams, situated geographically where it made sense? Let me know. But thanks for tuning in. Like I said, hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, that's great. If you didn't, that's cool as well. You can check out previous episodes if you'd like to. But as I always say, be safe out there. God bless. And I'll catch you in the next episode. All right. I'm out. Have a good one.